Good morning, good afternoon. I see some old friends are with us today. That's fantastic. The subject I've chosen for this, geospatial information, really does drive benefits across sectors and across the globe, is an interesting one because it's gaining a lot of traction. People are trying to understand these benefits. So let me talk through what I feel and some of the case studies that we have in the UK and that we've picked up globally to help you with your thinking. In a sense, John Kedar, I've been with Ordnance Survey nearly 4 years now, and on the international side have travelled the globe, but importantly also represent help represent United Kingdom with United Nations GGIM, and was recently at the World Bank Land and Poverty Conference. Okay, so we've got the theme up on screen. Let's carry straight on. Sorry, we're not moving on here, are we? We've just got a bit of a hold up here. There we go. Let me just tell you about Ordnance Survey in one slide. It runs as a business. What does that mean? We have to generate profit for the government that owns us. And so I thought I'd just show that government sales are just under about half of our revenue. Business sales are well over a third, and in fact approaching 45% now. And there's a bit of government open data where we get a subsidy for putting stuff out for free. So geospatial data can work as a profitable enterprise. The other point I'd make is that only 6% now is paper. Everything else is data in environment. Now, what is fundamental geospatial information? The United Nations, the UN GGIM, is doing some work looking at what are the fundamental data sets that we believe are necessary for a nation to be able to really have that steady, solid underpinning of data. And you can see them on here. I won't list them. But I would say addressing is counted very much in amongst them, as is cadastre. To support land ownership. But the addressing one I'll come back to, in many respects that's becoming an increasingly valuable database because it has that unique reference number that can be given to any property, any flat in a sort of tower block that enables databases to be linked. But what do I mean by fundamental geospatial information? To me, it's the digital version of the physical infrastructure of a nation. It's the information that a nation needs in digital form across the board to prosper or even to survive, if you look at it from a security perspective. There's a lot of talk about authoritative data. I tend to use the word trusted data. You will use certain sources like Google Earth for certain things, but you wouldn't use it necessarily for land ownership. So why is it important that we give this some thought? Because actually the world that we live in changes massively. People are after data of improved accuracy, they're after things faster, they want higher quality, greater quantity. And they're trying to solve problems and reduce risk, solve problems. It really is around data. And if you think about, in societies that are looking towards automated vehicles in the future, well, clearly data takes on a whole new perspective as we support automated vehicles, or indeed use them as sensors to support national databases. So benefits cross a range of themes, if you like: effective government, economic growth, efficiency gains, enable citizens, national infrastructure, and the whole security thing. And here I've tied it up with protection of assets and resources. I'm going to go into some of this now to take us forward on this webinar. But look, we all face challenges around the world, and it doesn't matter whether we come from a high income or a low-income nation. Many of the challenges on the left here, be it climate change, instability, the move of people into cities, this social dynamic of urban growth, the need to generate more wealth, healthier citizens, the fact that actually many of us are living in times of austerity. These are all challenges that we face, and that geospatial information and indeed spatial data infrastructures are trying to help solve and support. But I want to make the point that those challenges are common in different perspectives across the globe. And so too in many respects the sectors. There are many different sectors that benefit from and utilize geospatial information in some shape or form. And I'll talk about these in more detail in a second, because this is really about where the benefits accrue. The point is, these are very broad sectors and will apply just as much in sub-Saharan Africa as in somewhere like Western Europe. And I think ultimately the level of detail, the amount of information, the way we handle information, and so on and so forth may well change, but there are a wide variety of sectors. But I want to come back and make an important point about that later on in the webinar, because it doesn't mean that the benefits that accrue directly in, let's just say, Germany, are the same as the benefits that accrue in Nigeria for a whole range of different socioeconomic reasons. So let's have a look to build on this sector piece. Ireland study recently by Indicon looked across a range of sectors, and you can see a measure. It doesn't really matter what the measure is, but you see a measure of how geospatial information is rated as significant for the conduct of those particular sectors. And again, let's not go through them one by one, line by line. I'm trying to get the message across that this is a complete pan-sector business. And Canada in 2015, a similar sort of look at geospatial information. And I've got a lot of information on this slide, but I want to draw out certain things in some detail. First of all, if you are looking on the left, you'll see that there are a number of Canadian states: Atlantic, Quebec, Ontario. And if we take even the very first line, agriculture, forestry, fishing and hunting, the sort of percentages of geospatial benefit, economic benefit if you like, accrued to that particular sector vary from state to state. So again, that agricultural one, Atlantic 2.5%, whereas Quebec 1.04%. So my point being that different parts of a nation will benefit differently in different sectors from geospatial information. Therefore, exactly the same nation to nation, we will have big differences. So agriculture in one nation, like Great Britain, for example, may be 1%, but you take a massive agricultural nation like Argentina, and it might be, as high as 3%. So that's the key point I want to take from this slide. States within a nation are different by implication, so too are nations. And what that means is you can't just take the study in one nation and directly read it across without a lot of thinking to another nation. So let's look at the key reasons that geospatial information has been fundamental to nations, the benefits. Security. Security has traditionally been the leading reason for national geospatial capabilities. Most mapping agencies started in defence, or they started in land administration. I'll come back to that in a second. But let's just take this defence thing. Very difficult to put financial benefit, financial figure on defence. But I think we listening in are well aware that that is probably the key driver. And if you're interested, bottom right there is the first of the military maps, big military maps, standard series for the whole of Great Britain, was done in Scotland some 270 years ago, when the Scots were last trying to rebel and become independent, how things go round. Taxation and government revenue generation is the next main benefit that I want to touch on. The reason for this is other nations don't necessarily, or their mapping agencies have sort of started from a cadastral land ownership perspective, and for the reasons of taxation, generating revenue for a government. So taxation is a driver, and when we look at the benefits and try and convince our political masters of the benefits? Well, of course, anything that can help them increase tax revenues, doesn't matter which nation in the world we're in, anything that can help raise tax revenue will be seen as a good thing, and helping convince the Minister of Finance, after all, that holds the purse strings. So property tax, agricultural land tax, even congestion charging. And with good addressing, actually, it makes the administration of businesses and income tax all the more easier. So taxation, real benefit there. But land administration sort of tied in, as I say, historically, quite often it's been as a result of taxation. Of course, now we look at land administration around tenure security, and therefore access to credit in order to develop property, whether it's business or personal, and indeed to help stimulate functional land markets. You can buy and sell something that you can show that you own. So land administration, a lot of benefits accrued with geospatial information in that area. And the fourth of the sort of key drivers I want to touch on before we go on to some of the smaller ones are the economic benefits. Successful businesses create successful economies at the end of the day, and geospatial information can be used across a wide variety of sectors, and some of them clearly listed here. And you might wonder about banking. Well, actually, banking uses geospatial information to help detect fraud, for example. When you have someone using an ATM machine in, let's say, Paris and Lagos, and somewhere like Bonn, all at the same time, it red flags to the system. That's a geospatial answer to a question. So businesses, and we'll come on to some of those as examples. Effectively, business planning, and I want to just focus on this because one of the questions that has been asked is really about the fact that in a turbulent economy, business is all about survival, not about decision making or expansion. And how does geospatial enable that survival? Well, I'll come back to that. But this is the planning. This is the trying to increase profits. Studying geospatially where people live, where new developments are going to take place, where the road networks are, where footfall happens in other shops, whatever you want to bring it in geospatially, and you start to make business decisions that increase profit. That's on the planning side. But actually on the operations side, and this is where and how I answer this question about turbulent economies, yes, you might not be looking to expand, but you certainly will be trying to have efficient operations in turbulent times, because ultimately if you don't have efficient operations, then you're going to be less likely to survive. And so this is a utilities example, and it was two databases in a single utilities department, utilities company rather. A billing database, i.e. who's getting charged for what they consume, and a supply database, who is being supplied. The two were run as independent databases, and it was only when proper addressing was introduced and the databases were linked that they found large numbers of properties were either being, well, it wouldn't have been the other way around, would it, were being supplied free utility. I think it was probably electricity, but it doesn't actually matter. So in turbulent times, you clearly don't want to be letting people have their utilities for free. This is a clear example of using geospatial information, as I say, addressing primarily, to help a company run more efficiently. So there's another business example. Let's look at some of the other areas where geospatial information really does accrue benefits to a nation. Urban development. We know that urban areas are increasing in scale year on year. Over 50% of people live in urban areas at the moment. And I would say, and I think everyone who's listening would concur, that you can't plan the development of those urban areas if you don't know what exists currently. But it's actually wider than the planning piece here. We're trying to improve the quality of services to citizens in a city, We're trying to communicate better. We're trying to, as decision makers, analyze better, and everything about efficiency and geospatial information plays into that space. So you can take, real world visualizations, and we could use a whole range of different pictures to illustrate that. But I would just say that for those nations looking at 5G communications in the future, actually really good 3D data is going to be essential for planning how that 5G network is installed in a city, and it probably won't be in rural areas because of the costs, because two main factors. With 5G, it's absolutely line of sight. Even trees and foliage can impact the signal, and you need to be near fiber in order to take the 5G data and get it onto a fiber network quickly. So geospatial planning for absolute efficiency. That's just one example at the digital end. But let's also look in a city environment about, and I say city because it's particularly important in cities, underground utilities. More and more underground utilities as fibre goes in, clearly. Well, a lot of utility information is not well defined, not well held. And in London, something like $130 million a year is lost just to roadworks from roads being dug up for utility repairs, and the roads being dug up in the wrong place, or you dig up a road in one place one day and you do it further down the road another day, separate day, and so you close the road for twice as long as perhaps you needed to do so. It's this understanding of underground utilities, absolutely vital, and you can start to see how you bring data together from above ground, below ground, to understand our environment. Now, you could try and put a figure on it, and I challenged a country to do so, but if I give you an example, they were trying to build a new motorway interchange in a city environment, or just on the outskirts of a city, and came across a pipe, and no one knew what it was. Actually, it was oxygen, so it's a good job they didn't drive through it and dig it up. It was oxygen flowing to a hospital. The point being, the construction stopped on that site for a number of months. You could put a figure of millions of dollars onto something like that. Transport, benefits to transport. Well, one, and I'll take waste disposal. If a local authority and municipality can reduce the costs of waste disposal, then clearly it's going to try and do so. And as a geospatial problem, if you know where people live, where the road network is, etc., then actually you can analyze and reduce the number of vehicles needed for waste collection in a city, and that also has consequence on environment. But let's take out to the right of this slide. Of course, it's more than that. Automated vehicles, yes, they're coming along, and there are a range of reasons why good geospatial information, really good current geospatial information, becomes quite important. And it's all to do with confidence and trust in driverless vehicles. They'll have all their onboard sensors, but ultimately one needs and will need that good geospatial underpinning, and it needs to be up to date, of course. So transport, absolutely sector, benefits enormously from geospatial information. E-government, better e-services. It's not just e-government, it's any service, but you really do save money through online transactions. There's some figures at the bottom of the slide there. This is UK figures, £8.80 for a face-to-face transaction, 15p for an online transaction. That is something like let's just say about 50%, sorry, a 1 to 50 ratio, so quite significant. And there's an example on here, but you think of any business transaction, not just a government transaction, this whole move into the digital environment. Responding to crisis, resilience is a big challenge in many parts of the world. In fact, I would suggest all parts of the world, and it's not just global warming, obviously. And the ability to mitigate, prevent, respond to crisis, well, actually, you know, you need the map, don't you? It's as simple as that. But actually, in this sort of digital age, it's the ability to combine and predict. So where is flooding likely to occur, given the weather forecast and the wind forecast and the tides or whatever it might be? You predict where the flooding is likely to occur. You predict it right down to localized areas. And then once you understand which properties might be affected, you're able to do something to support those that live in those properties, particularly when you look at your database of properties with those that are vulnerable in some shape or form, so that you can actually take particular action to support those. So in a sense, this resilience piece, absolutely critical. And there are some massive examples from around the world of flooding, volcanic eruptions, so on and so forth, all geospatial information related in terms of supporting the outcomes. Emergency services. Did you know, and I didn't until we did a particular piece of work, but if you can get emergency vehicles to a cardiac arrest in a little bit of a shorter response time, then you can actually save people's lives. The quicker you can actually administer first aid, the more lives that are saved. And life has a value. Statistical agencies put value on life, and you can see 3 examples shown on the slide. I mean, it will vary nation to nation, obviously. But you can start to say, well, if we can save 100 lives a year, then there is a real financial value on what we are doing for the nation. So this emergency services piece is often quite a big differentiator when it comes to demonstrating the real value of geospatial information. Statistics. We combining statistics and geospatial information, and looking at statistics geospatially, absolute benefits there. Sustainable environment. Again, linked into this business of resilience and so on, but it's more than just resilience. It's actually, as we grow, we need to maintain a sustainable environment. We need to do so geospatially. And this is where satellite remote sensing has a real part to play. And you bring in the remote sensing and some of the sort of land-based, if you like, geospatial information, and you can start to make real decisions. What's happening to those mangrove swamps? How much have we lost in the last 20 years? What do we need to do in order to maintain those mangrove swamps? Do we need to do something with the estuary, the flow of water, whatever it might be? So again, looking at it geospatially really does help create benefits. Natural resources, more of the same. But agriculture, and I don't want to go through this in detail because a lot of people would say that, yeah, okay, that's great, you know, all this high-tech stuff is great in somewhere like the fields of Canada. Well, actually, agriculture is, let me take Nigeria as an example, there's a real drive to diversify the economy, and agriculture is one of those areas that they want to maximize in terms of diversification. And there's potentially a taxation piece there, hence I've underlined agricultural cadastre. But goods to market, actually if the roads are not in the right place or not of the right quality to get fresh goods to the airports or the seaports or wherever else, then your sort of diversification into agriculture is not going to succeed. So this agricultural thing isn't just about the high tech. It's basics too. Sustainable development goals are well talked about, and the United Nations has done and can give very good presentations about how geospatial helps underpin many of these sustainable development goals. But I would say it's about 2 things. It's one, it's about the measurement of achievement towards the sustainable development goals that we all have to demonstrate as we move forward. But it's also actually about helping the achievement of those sustainable development goals. It's both sides of that coin. So I get towards a conclusion, really. You can take some of these benefits and you can quantify them in financial figures. So I talked about the value of life. You can look at transport and logistics. You can put real hard figures on some of these things. And a number of studies have been done in different parts of the world that try and have a sort of financial figure. And this isn't all of them by any means. But what I would say on these are all, how would I say, high income Western nation type studies. And one of the first points I made right up front is every nation's different. So these have a certain applicability, but only certain applicability. But it shows that there is benefit. And I would also say that each of these studies is measuring something slightly different. So you can't just take an average across this board and say that's the impact on GDP. But these figures are out there, the reports are out there on the internet, and what's really good about them is when you delve into them in detail, you gain a lot more information about why, for that particular nation, those particular benefits were accrued. And it is about winning the argument. So in UK, a couple of recent reports have looked at trying to show to decision makers that a bit of investment in geospatial actually accrues real benefit. So the top one here was actually around just 15 applications that are used in a number of government authorities, local government authorities in the UK. If you rolled them out and the majority of local authorities used them, it would have the figure shown here, $0.65 billion worth of benefit each year. And right at the front I showed you a slide showing how much government pays percentage-wise for its geospatial information. It's around, let's just say it's around $90 million per year for its geospatial information. And here is an example of real benefit, because just using certain applications would pay them back 6 or 7 times. And local authority addressing, again demonstrating with hard fact finding that using addressing saves local authorities money. Now, I said Western nations. This was briefed at the World Bank Land and Poverty Conference last month, and this is Albania. This is a piece of work, as you can see here, done by the World Bank and Consultingware. But what they were trying to do was look at it from a middle-income country perspective. And it's not easy. It absolutely isn't easy. So they came up with a number of figures. Let's not go through them here, across a number of sectors to demonstrate the value. But there's sort of, I suppose the headline here is the preliminary estimates suggested a healthy return on investment for the money put into geospatial information and a spatial data infrastructure in Albania. That work continues. And it is a need to make it personal, because ultimately every nation is different. The transport costs, the costs of hiring people to drive vehicles, the taxation regimes, every country is different. And it has to be personal. The Minister of Finance for Jordan is not going to base a decision based on United States data unless it is demonstrated unequivocally that actually that particular element of data can be transposed. So there's a need to make it personal, and Jordan's just an example to help make that point. So to close then, yeah, all very well, great benefits. But those benefits come from having up-to-date geospatial information and having access to that information, back to those fundamental data sets we talked about at the beginning. And so you need some form of national mapping agency to provide that. They may be a broker, they may not do it all themselves, it doesn't matter, but there needs to be this source of data that I would call the single version of the truth. And of course, one of the fundamental problems is that we've talked about that broad spectrum of sectors. Well, all the blue blobs are sort of government sectors, if you like. There's some purple on here, which are industry sectors, and then there are projects, which might be World Bank projects or own government projects. Well, if they're all creating their own geospatial information for their own use, that's an incredibly inefficient way to use business. And that's back to this national mapping agency has a real role to play here, and often needing transformation. We'll move on. But also, and I think we all know this in this room, again, to get these benefits, you have to be able to integrate data from different data sources, and this is the whole point of spatial data infrastructures. And you start to get real benefit as you do so. And of course, you know, the spatial data infrastructure, if you like, is more than just data, it's more than just technology, it's policy, strategy, education, all those other things that people are familiar with, but are shown on this slide just for record. To conclude then, there is no doubt in all the studies that we have looked at that geospatial information brings significant benefits to a nation across all sectors. There is no doubt that these vary from nation to nation. You do need to study it on a national perspective in some shape or form. And building a national picture is important if you're going to convince politicians that it's worth investing in what I've called geospatial enablement. Well, the question that came in earlier about turbulent economy, you know, we used the logistics as an example there, absolutely. But take insurance, another thing. The insurance market's pretty cutthroat, isn't it? And if you can look at risks on an individual property basis rather than on a sort of postcode area basis, then you start to be able to give better quotes than perhaps your competitors, and so the insurance industry is increasingly looking to use geospatial to become more efficient and to be more competitive. And there's another example. That's an operational use of better geospatial.